Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the chance to learn from your word, from each other, but mostly from you. Be with this stammering tongue. Use it to proclaim your word. Not what I have to say, but what you have to say. For it's in your name we pray. Amen. So, Mike started off the service this morning by asking everybody how they are. I'm going to ask it again. How is everybody today? Got some good answers. Good. One thing you're going to find out is that I like audience participation. Okay? So I want you to feel free when the time comes. I'm going to ask questions, and I want you to actually answer some of them. Okay? So we're going to get you used to that. We're going to try a little experiment, try to get you used to not being afraid to speak up. Okay? So I'm going to count to 3. And I want everybody in here, and if you're at home and doing this, I want you to join in, even at your house. I'm going to count to 3. Everybody in here, pick a number. I don't care what it is, from 1 to 10. And for the nerds among us, stick to integers. 1 to 10, and just shout it out, okay? All together. 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. Now we're going to do something for real. Okay, we're going to do the same thing, except this time, that number from 1 to 10, I want you to rate how your week was. 1 being the worst ever, 10 being the best ever. Okay? Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay. I heard several different numbers. I'm not going to repeat them because I don't know whose was which, and that's okay. But I want to ask you another question, but this time I don't want answers, okay? I just want you to think about this. If I were to ask you the 5 best things that happened to you this week, would it be easy to come up with them pretty quickly? Okay. What if I were to ask you for the 5 worst things that happened to you? Kind of hard, challenging, bad things. Would that be easy to come up with? Yeah. You know, it's interesting that for a lot of people, it seems like coming up with the bad is a little bit easier to come up with than the good. And that's a shame. But when we remember that, you know, I don't know if any of you remember the movie or the play of The Fiddler on the Roof. Yeah, the matchmaker. Oh, we suffer. Yes. We suffer in silence, but we suffer, right? It's kind of easy for that to happen. And when that does happen, it's very easy for us to get to the point of saying, poor me, when in reality, what we should be looking to say is, poor me. Now, today we're going to try to take a look at some principles that can move us from poor me to poor me. We're going to look at a character in the Bible that we can all relate to, okay? It'll make it a little easier to see those kinds of principles in our own lives. But we're going to start with a saying of Jesus. Now, this was from the Sermon on the Mount. He started off by saying, happy are people who are hopeless, because the kingdom of heaven is theirs. Is that really what he meant for people to be, as hopeless? I don't think so. I don't think he really meant for us to be hopeless. He wants us to have hope. That was why he came, was to give us hope. So let me ask you a question. What does the word poor, P-O-O-R, like it is up there, or up there, what does that mean? Lacking? Having less than we may need? Okay. Less than average in a certain category? Okay. Anything else? Okay. Those all echo what I found in my favorite place to go when I ask questions about what does a word mean, dictionary.com. I love it. It's easy. Having little or no means of support, deficient or lacking in something specified. So here's a more important question than what the word means. What makes me feel, what makes you feel like saying, poor me? This is the audience participation part. Pardon me? Loneliness. Okay. Loneliness can make me feel poor me. What else? When things don't go my way. Absolutely. I like that one. Insecurity. Okay. When your riding lawnmower blows up. I will agree with you there. You told me that story. When you have a horrible boss. Okay? What else? When you have horrible coworkers. Yeah, that can do it. Anything else you can think of? Just off the top of your head. When you have cancer. That's true. That's very true. Well, we're going to start looking at somebody who had to deal with some things like that. Now, our relatable example today is a gentleman by the name of Paul. Anybody ever heard of him? Yeah, okay. And we know that we can all relate to him, right? I didn't hear as many rights there. You think we may have a hard time relating to him sometimes? Well, let me tell you this. If anybody had an excuse, a good excuse to say, poor me, it was him. Because he had some messed up circumstances. So we're going to look at some of them today. We're going to start, and this is in Acts chapter 9. It says, during the journey as he approached Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven encircled him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice asking him, Saul, Saul, why are you harassing me? Saul asked, who are you, Lord? I am Jesus, whom you are harassing, came the reply. Now we pick up a couple of verses later, and we continue on and say, after they picked up Saul from the ground, because he hit the ground, he opened his eyes, but he couldn't see. So they led him by the hand into Damascus. For 3 days he was blind and neither ate nor drank anything. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had plans in life? Yeah? Okay. Ever have those plans not go the way you wanted them to? Ever have really carefully made plans and they just didn't work out? Paul had a plan for his life. He had education. He had training. He had power. He was upwardly mobile. And then all of a sudden one day, out of the blue, quite literally, everything changed. If you've ever had plans that just changed out of the blue, guess what? You can relate to Paul. But there's more. This is in the second letter to the Corinthian church. Paul says, I received the 40 lashes minus one from the Jews 5 times. I was beaten with rods 3 times. I was stoned once. I was shipwrecked 3 times. Unlucky passenger. I've spent a day and a night on the open sea. I've been on many journeys. I've faced dangers from rivers, from robbers, my people, and Gentiles. I've faced dangers in the city, in the desert, on the sea, and from false brothers and sisters. I faced these dangers with hard work and heavy labor, many sleepless nights, hunger and thirst, often without food, and in the cold without enough clothes. Think you can't relate? Let me ask you a question. Has anybody here ever heard of a gentleman by the name of Jeff Foxworthy? What's he famous for? You're a redneck. If you've ever, you're a redneck. You might be a redneck. Well, we're gonna kind of take that approach. But if you've ever felt whipped, beaten down, or like people are throwing things at you that you don't deserve, you can relate. If you've ever felt like you were in over your head, you can relate. If you've ever felt like you were worn down by your daily grind, you can relate. If you've ever felt betrayed by those who should be on your side, you can relate. If you've ever felt attacked by those that you're trying to help, you can relate. If you've ever felt like it's never safe anywhere you go, you can relate. If you've ever felt like people who seem to be one thing but aren't are the people you have to deal with, you can relate. If you've ever felt overworked, you can relate. If you've ever felt like you can't sleep or don't even have the basic necessities of life, you can relate. If you've ever felt like a life-altering disease can change your world, you can relate. Now, that Paul didn't mention that in this list to the Corinthian church, but in Galatians chapter 6, he talks about writing such a letter with such large letters. Tradition has it that he wrote that letter himself instead of using somebody else to write it, and that the reason it had such large letters was because he couldn't see. I can relate. He, according to tradition, on his first missionary journey, he contracted malaria. And one of the side effects of the malaria was to mess up his vision. It went with him for the rest of his life. So maybe, just maybe, we can relate. But wait, you also get this. Besides all the other things I could mention, there's my daily stress because I'm concerned about all the churches. Now, there's a lot of other things that was happening to him that are recorded in the book of Acts, and we're not going to go into them. But take some time and read through them. And ask yourself, what's underlying here? If he was in prison, have you ever felt trapped? You kind of get the picture, right? Paul had concerns for things that were much larger than his own life. He felt responsible for all the churches that he had started, that he had worked with. And we all have things that are bigger than just us. that we're involved in, that we care about, that we have concerns about all the time. And those things taken by themselves can easily make me say, poor me. Let's say it together. Poor me. Paul had a reason to say poor me, but he chose instead to say poor me. You see, he had discovered a way to keep on going when life threw situations at him, threw circumstances at him that would make him say, poor me. Later on, earlier in the book of 2 Corinthians, than that list of wonderful things, you find this verse. For Christ's love compels us. Let me ask you something. What does compel mean to you? Pardon me? I heard somebody. Drives. Okay. What else? Anything else? Strongly urges. Persuades. It could also mean like being drafted into the, or forced, if is a word, drafted into the military, right? Makes you do something you don't necessarily want to do. Okay. Now, I like the words, drives or motivates. That's another word I like. And all of those words that everybody has come up with here pretty well fits into those. Let's say this. This verse can actually be taken two different ways. Okay? First way, the love that Jesus showed to me by giving himself for my sin drives and motivates me. That would have been true for Paul. Should be true for each of us too. But there's another way we can take it. And it goes the opposite way. It says, the love that I have for Jesus is the driving and motivating force in my life. It is what drives the way I act and the way I react to everything. Now, Paul looked to Jesus for his example, but he encouraged others to do the same. To the Philippian church, he wrote this: adopt the attitude that was in Christ Jesus. Though he was in the form of God, he did not consider being equal with God something to exploit, but he emptied himself by taking the form of a slave and by becoming a human being. Jesus emptied himself. Another way of saying emptied himself is to say he poured himself out. Now, when I think of pouring something out, I like to, I don't necessarily like to think of it this way, but I think of it this way. You know that bottle of water, that half-empty bottle of water that's in the front seat of your car? That's been there for like a week longer than it should have been there in the hot Nebraska sun, and it's got that plastic bottle, and it's kind of great water to drink, right? No? It's kind of wasted, isn't it? What do you do with it? Pour it out. I kind of think like that when I think of pouring out. But, that's not the idea here. The idea here is not wasting, but it's pouring with a purposeful, positive intent. See, Jesus didn't waste his life. And Paul didn't want to waste his life either. Like I said, this passage was written to the church in Philippi. That's the town where Paul and his companions were imprisoned. And you can read about it in Acts chapter 16 if you want to. They were feeling so poor me that they were singing praises at midnight. The prison was shaken, and they could have escaped, but instead took the chance to pour me onto the life of the jailer. So now we're back in 2 Corinthians. Well, I like to move around, if you haven't noticed. We're back in 2 Corinthians. So we aren't depressed. But even if our bodies are breaking down on the outside, the person that we are on the inside is being renewed every day. Our temporary minor problems are producing an eternal stockpile of glory for us that is beyond all comparison. We don't focus on the things that can be seen, but on the things that can't be seen. The things that can't be seen don't last, but the things that can't be seen are eternal. Now, this is a hugely important point here. If you look back at all the reasons that Paul had given us earlier for saying, poor me, those were in chapter 11 of 2 Corinthians. Those verses we just read were in chapter 4 of the same letter. That list of things that could have been interpreted as making me say, poor me, those were the things that Paul had already decided way back in chapter 4 were temporary, minor problems. That's a tough thing to look, when you look back at that list and say, those are temporary, minor problems. But he had his priorities. And for him, it was a conscious decision that Jesus' love for him and his love for Jesus would drive him. Because the decision was there, the circumstances that were beyond his control were not going to get him down. It's important to realize that if we want to live a life of poor me, we must make a choice of our priorities before life throws stuff at us. Daily. Not a one-time decision. I wish it was. Life would be a lot easier if it was, but it's every day. We have to make that decision. Paul said this to the Philippian church. He goes, but even if I am poured out like a drink offering upon the altar of the service for your faith, I'm glad. I'm glad with all of you. You should be glad about it in the same way. Be glad with me. So what's a drink offering? He's talking about being poured out as one. What is it? Well, I'm glad you asked. In Exodus chapter 29, the priests were told to offer a drink offering along with the burnt offering. So a drink offering in that capacity was something that accompanies a redemptive prayer for sin. In Genesis chapter 35, Jacob built a tower, and he consecrated it by pouring a drink offering on it. So a drink offering is something that dedicates or consecrates something or someone to God. It enables people to see that God was at work here at one point. And if he was then, he still is today. And if he still is today, he will be tomorrow. The big thing here is that a drink offering was something that was spent, not wasted. Paul didn't want to look back at his life and say it was wasted. Rather, he wanted to say it was spent to pave the way for Jesus to work wherever he happened to find himself. As for me, my life has already been poured out. This is in 2 Timothy. Has already been poured out as an offering to God. The time of my death is near. See, he lived his life in such a way that when he came to the end of it, he knew he had been poured out as a drink offering. He knew that he had spent his life to further Jesus' presence in his world. That's nice. But if it's not practical, then all this time has been kind of like that half bottle of water. So the real question is this: what do we pour our lives into and onto? What do we do to pave the way for Jesus' presence? Today, let's dedicate ourselves to daily decide this coming week that Jesus' love is our motivation so that we can live our lives pouring ourselves out as a drink offering for Jesus. And our actions and our reactions to things that are beyond our control, and in that way we can further Jesus' influence and presence in the world we live in our world right around us. Practice these things. Whatever you've learned and received and heard or saw in, and I'm going to insert the word Paul, the God of peace will be with you. We can do this.